First up, the rise of behavioral finance as a field of study has provided students and investors alike with an alternative narrative of what drives human behavior. One of the men that has contributed meaningfully to this workspace was at Regarding Capital Management's annual Shifting Perspectives conference that being held today. He, of course, is Dr. Robert Chiodini, and he, of course, is also known as the Godfather of influence. We've got Warren standing by, who's going to take us through what he had to say. And Warren, you in fact spoke to the man himself earlier today.
Yes, I did. Thanks very much, Sam. Obviously, I did speak to Robert before he actually spoke at the conference, so we'll obviously get Pete Viljoen and Marcel's take on that just now. But I thought we'd just give our viewers a little bit of an intro into the man and his work, called the Godfather of Influence, Dr. Robert Chiodini. I guess if you look at his CV or his resume, as you call it, first of all, he's been the author of a book called Influence, Science and Practice, which has sold over 2 million copies. And it's one of the favorites at the Berkshire Hathaway conference. In fact, I think it's the only book in 9 years that's been recommended at the Berkshire Hathaway conference. So very influential professor. He's the Regents Professor Emeritus of Psychology and Marketing at the Arizona State University. And as you can see, he's taken the theory and the work he's done and put it into practice with large companies, the likes of which include Coca-Cola, KPMG, and even NATO. So just to get into a little bit of the discussion I had with him today, we talk about this social influence and how what drives people's behaviors, especially in times of uncertainty. And one of the things he's really brought to our attention is the fact that we take a lot from what our peers and people like us do. In fact, the word he used was people that are like us, and that surround us in terms of the peer groups. And I've actually got a little card that's used in Marriott hotels and resorts. I'm sure I guess we'll have something to say about that. But it's just I guess indicative of a study that they did. They wanted people to use towels and recycle towels. So they actually conducted I guess a research or an experiment where they used different words and different things to try and encourage people to change their behavior and recycle more towels, which would obviously benefit the environment. They came up with a few of the different sayings. One of them were things like "save our planet." It's beneficial to improving our environment. They used a different take on that, and then they actually came up with one where it related to this concept of peer group influence, and it said, "Join your fellow guests in helping to save the environment." They actually found that the amount of people recycling towels jumped by 34% when they used that last one, and they even used a derivative that was even more specific, saying people in this room help people that have stayed in this room recycle more towels, and that's just one indication of the sort of effect that this peer group influence has over us. Just in a final sort of take, what was funny about some of the research that he's done is that people are kind of unaware of to what degree this peer influence has on us. And here's a picture of a gentleman playing a guitar in a subway, and obviously he's got his thing out there and he's looking for money. And they took an experiment of people and did just one simple thing. As people came up the subway stairs and saw the guitar player playing his guitar, they got another person to come and drop money into the donations box. And they actually found that when they asked the person, the people that had followed and seen other people dropping money into the deposit box, the numbers rose. And they asked those people, why did you go and put money in the deposit box? And one of the things they said was that they were actually unaware of seeing the person. They related it perhaps to the music or to the feeling they had when they walked up the stairs. But people were completely unaware of this peer group review. And so I think what we wanted to do is just carry this work a little bit further with, I guess, the Godfather of RCM, and get Pete Viljoen's take on how this peer group influence affects the way people make investment decisions, Sam.
Well, there we go. Thanks, Warren, for setting the context for us there. Pete, Marcel, thank you for joining us today, both at the conference, Shifting Perspectives. So, Pete, there we go. Charlie Munger swears by this book. And how have you found that peers influence your investment decisions or influence investment decisions?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting angle from the investor's point of view, because we deal with markets and prices quoted in markets all day long, and I think one needs to understand that the main driver of prices, in the short term at least, is not always maths and spreadsheets and numbers. It is actually emotions and social influences that drives people's behavior and how they interact with the market, how they transact with the market, whether they're very positive or very negative. When they're very positive, they'll buy up to high prices. When they're very negative, they'll sell down to low prices. And those are all emotional, behavioral type of things. And so what we try and do at RCM is we try and understand social influences and how that drives behavior, to see if we can uncover investment opportunities in that fashion, where the prices get driven too high or too low by this social influence or social behavior. And I think Bob Chiodini's books have been, for us at least, enlightening in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Peter, obviously it took a little bit of a different turn, but before we get into some of the things he said later on after I'd interviewed him, I just wanted to get your perspective really on a couple of the facts. I mean, we spend so much time in this industry training young men to get, or young women to get CAs, to get these CFA charters. Do you think that the great investors of the future might come from fields that are a little bit more diverse, perhaps psychology, economic history? Is this behavioral finance making enough of a dent in the way you operate and the way you think to sort of lay the foundation for that?
No, I think one needs, and I think it's Charlie Munger that coined the term, a lattice work of different skills. Quantitative skills, like accounting skills, are necessary but not sufficient. Behavioral finance or social skills are necessary but not sufficient. You need all of these skills all together in a package to be, or to try and be a good investor. So you can't say you just need these or just need those. You need to pull from all sorts of different disciplines: physics, psychology, accounting, economics, all these sort of disciplines. If you can distill the big ideas from all these disciplines and work them into your lattice work of the way you see the world and you analyze things, I think that can make you a strong investor.
How do you instill that in people that you employ, and how do you instill that thinking in terms of not just being unthinking automations, is what Bob refers to them as? Yeah. How do you instill that thought process and people to actually think for themselves?
So I think the conference that we host annually, the Shifting Perspective Conference, is in a microcosm what we try and do at RCM. It pulls together, at today's conference we had 6-7 different speakers from different fields, and so we pulled together leaders in different areas in South Africa and internationally, and just got them to speak about what they do and how they see the world. We agree with some of those things, we disagree with some of those things, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that we give voice to different opinions, and we do that internally in the firm as well, where we allow people to sort of roam freely in terms of their thoughts and their intellect. And we also employ people from different backgrounds. So
The problem is sometimes in the markets is that almost it's the loudest voice that gets heard. Right, It's the most charismatic voice that gets heard, and sometimes it's the quiet voices that one should be listening to.
That's right.
How do you avoid listening to the wrong voices, really?
Well, I think if you've been around the block a couple of times, you can pick up who's wrong and who's right pretty quickly. I think if one listens to the reasoning behind whatever exposition people are giving for their point of view, then you can pick up whether they're right or wrong. And at the end of the day, people are going to be wrong sometimes. I think sometimes it's healthy to make some mistakes, as long as those mistakes are not big mistakes. I think Nicholas Taylor summed it up in his latest book, Anti-Fragile, is that it is anti-fragile to make small mistakes. Small experiments, small mistakes. As long as you don't find yourself in a position where you're making big mistakes, that is anti-fragile. That's a robust situation to be in. Mm-hmm. So we allow freedom in the firm for people to make mistakes. We encourage that as long as one learns from your mistakes and you don't make the same mistake over and over again. I think that's an important thing.
Marcel, obviously just to bring you in here, you're speaking at the conference today. We're going to get your thoughts about the gaming industry in the second half of the show. But for you as a business, I just wanted to raise a point we were talking about off air. I think Chiodini's work goes a step further in, I guess, analysing not only what investors do, but what consumers do. And looking at the peer group influence, you mentioned off air that some of the things you have to respond to are things like complaints laid at TripAdvisor and other, I guess, forms of peer group and social media influences. Perhaps you can tell us, is the social media making it more useful for you to listen to what your clients are saying?
Or has it become a big headache?
No, it is useful. You have to take the stuff in context. And what Pitt refers to as the lattice work of different inputs into a business, I could call common sense. So what we get is, for example, on TripAdvisor, we'll have a hotel like Elangeni in Durban that's got 700 rooms. Over 5 years, we've probably had 1 million rooms sold in that hotel. We'll have 200 TripAdvisor comments. It's a minuscule portion. So if we just rely on that, we're going to listen to the loudest voice. You can get genuine complaints there, and you'll pick up quickly if there's a problem with room service or something else. But what we try and then do is put in the common sense approach. So we put out the guest surveys, which everyone does around the world, and you try and work through that and say, what are the complaints that we can do something about? What are the complaints that are related to that you can never solve? Another industry's example is if you ask the people getting off the aeroplane from economy class at the end of a 17-hour flight, what would they like? They're going to say legroom, better food, and better everything else. And you ask them, would they pay an extra 2 or 3 times the price ticket? The answer is no. So in some cases you can't solve the problem because you're in an economy product or you're in a product that they're not prepared to pay for. But you do have to take as many of these things into account as you can, and then just apply common sense to say, how do we make this work for our business? And the other part of it is don't overpromise and underdeliver. So think logically about what do guests really want, what do guests really need, as opposed to going into the sort of the impossible dreaming idea that you can never deliver and you create an expectation that you can't meet.
Mm-hmm. So how do you respond to individual complaints on social media, and how much emphasis do you place as a company in terms of word of mouth? Because word of mouth can be hugely powerful in a positive and a negative way in a service delivery industry. So
word of mouth is vital. It's a big portion of our business. The part that you see on social media is quite a small portion of that word of mouth. It's obviously very topical, and in the media world it's quite big, but we have a far broader network of word of mouth that we deal with. We respond, for example, TripAdvisor, the general managers will respond to the complaints and they will deal with them, and where we've messed up, we fix it, and if in some other cases you just know that we haven't messed up here, this is someone who's not happy for whatever reason, but it's not actually our fault, and you try and deal with them logically and as you go through. Word of mouth comes from the everyday interaction with our guests. How do we deal with travel agents? How do we deal with buyers, which can be your sort of group bookers in government, your group bookers in corporates, etc. Those, if you deliver a good conference in Durban, the 1 or 2 TripAdvisor comments is not going to move half as much as the 400 delegates that leave at the end of that conference and realize what Durban's got to offer, as an example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question. I guess then, Pete, just to come back to the work of Chiodini, and obviously, the angle for investors is sometimes, certainly when you talk about a value investment philosophy like your own, you're taking care of people's money, you're putting them into positions, and you're taking positions that often against the crowd and against that herd sort of mentality, and that's very uncomfortable. But while you as the professional investor might understand that, your investors themselves at the grassroots level might not do that. So what is the challenge for professional investment managers when you have to go against the grain and it has to be uncomfortable? How do you try and communicate that to your investors?
So I think that word you use, communicate, is exactly the right word. So as investors, professional investors, we have 2 jobs. The one job is to invest the money sensibly. That often entails buying assets where the prices are low, and the prices are low because there's negative news around and that sort of thing, which isn't a comfortable place, as you mentioned. Our second job is then to communicate that in a constructive fashion to our clients. And that is one of the areas in which we would use Chiodini's work, so that we can communicate to our clients in a way that they find acceptable, that they find comfort in what we do. So we need to give our clients comfort that we're doing the right thing over the long term for them. And on the other hand, we need to be very businesslike in the way we invest money, and to deal with the markets. You are in the business world, and in that world, your relationships with your counterparties in the business world is very important. And if you can use social influence to get the outcomes you need in the investing side of things, that is a positive for your clients as well. So we can use Chiodini's work on both sides of our business, in communicating with our clients and also in dealing with the businesses in which we are investors on our clients' behalf.